Sam, welcome to Give It a Nudge. It's great to have you on the show. Really going to be an interesting one here as we'll sort of give you a little bit of a talk about let our audience know that your business is incredibly early stage. You know, we're 5-6 weeks, I believe it's something like that. But let's sort of go through all different parts of that. But let's start by framing up what you're doing. If you can just tell our audience what the business is called and what you're actually doing, and then we'll sort of get into the journey later on. That would be great.
Absolutely, Steve. Look, thanks very much for having me on your show today. Very, very happy to be here. Look, we're building a platform. Our company's name is WeReach Alternatives. Our platform is WeReach. And what we're doing is enabling Australian sophisticated investors to access the world's leading private market opportunities. So the opportunities which don't include traditional listed stock markets, etc., that have long had hurdles to entry for the individuals, the self-managed super funds, etc.
Okay, so in my view, my understanding of that is I'm very aware that there's a lot of investment opportunities that are only open to certain levels of people because of the sheer volume you have to invest. Like there's a minimum amount of investment, or you have to be through some sort of hedge fund or something like that. So you're opening up that world of secret investments, so to speak, to sophisticated investors through their superannuation funds. Am I getting that right?
That's correct. Not only through the superannuation funds, but it's a great target for us. And look, let me give you a bit more background. Early stage investments through private equity is it's been around forever, and it's something which there's many hurdles to the average investor trying to get into it, and rightly so, Steve, as you mentioned. One of the hurdles is a minimum investment size. So as an example, a leading private equity fund may be raising $10 billion for a new fund, and that fund may be a mandate to invest in global tech, for example. However, the minimum investment size for that is likely to be between $10 and $50 million. So no matter how well connected you are, you're very unlikely to be able to write a check for $10 million to go into one single investment.
Absolutely. And traditionally, these investments have obviously returned higher than perhaps other investments, and that's one of the reasons people would want to get involved with this. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So, you know, they're long-term investments. Looking at private equity as an example again, the tenure can be anywhere from 7 to 10 years. What these investment managers are doing is getting into owning the company or taking a position in the company at a very early stage, and then supporting the company through the journey, right through to many cases an IPO opportunity or an M&A opportunity. But historically, the outperformance is significant. And it's also helping with a lot of other things like volatility. They're not quite as liquid as a stock market. And when you're in a stock market, we all know when things look dire, people are very, very tempted to hit the button and get out of that. And psychology being what it is, we tend to do that at the wrong time, at the bottom of the market. So having a longer term, less liquid investment as part of your portfolio, not as your entire portfolio, but as an integral part, helps drive both outperformance as well as leveling out the volatility.
Yep, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. Okay. And so just before we get onto your journey and how you sort of got here, am I right? Is it 5 weeks that you've technically been in together? Is that right?
Look, we joined, my co-founders and I met on the Antler VC platform. I think you know Antler. I know you had Adele on your show.
Very well aware, yes.
Earlier this year. So we met on this. We met on the accelerator program or the incubator program with Antler about 8 weeks ago. So it's a very short time that we've been together, and we formally came together about 6 or 7 weeks ago. Yes.
Right. So yes, I think you now hold the record for the earliest stage business that we've had on the show, which is good, right? It's exciting. And yes, look, I'm also an antler angel, and we've probably had 10 or 15 different antler companies on the show over the time as well. So unfortunately, I'm in this antler angel program, but I haven't been able to give it the time that I've needed because our business has just been exploding. But so I'm sure I can see you on the platform and all that as well. So that's good. It's an interesting program. I love it. All right. Well, let's. I think it's one of the most interesting parts is, and maybe you can pick yourself and maybe another founder if you like. But tell us the stories of where you guys came from that brought you together in this sort of antler program to doing what you're doing now. What's your sort of history, and how did you end up suddenly becoming an entrepreneur?
Okay, well, I'll talk about me to start with. So look, you can tell I'm fairly old. I've been around in the financial markets for around 25 years now. I started off in stockbroking back in the mid-90s, just as the craze of internet-based stock trading took off. And it was chaos, I've got to tell you. And I very, very quickly found myself moving into strategic business roles within these finance companies because there is so much risk associated with doing things badly. So I've got a lot of experience at diversifying businesses within a corporation. So in 2001, I moved to Hong Kong, and I've been out of Australia until earlier this year. I've just come back in January this year. In Hong Kong, I've had exposure to stockbroking, market making, merger and acquisition, corporate finance, private wealth. I set up a funds distribution business for a family office in Hong Kong, and I was based in Taiwan for 4 years doing that, which was crazy.
Not bad.
My last 5 years have been, though, in private equity, which is what we're here today to talk about, private equity and private markets. And what's really driven me is I've seen how private markets in a non-structured way is chaotic. And I'll give you some examples. You know, I was dealing with a Chinese high net worth individual who'd bought Impossible Foods 5 years ago in a private market transaction. He put that in a Cayman SPV that he owned with his brother. He's now made 10 or 20 times his money, and he wants to exit the position. But he doesn't want to give anyone any management rights over his SPV. He doesn't want to fulfill any KYC issues because he's a high net worth Chinese individual who's very quiet. And the buyer's looking for all of this comfort around what he's buying.
So let's just step back one second, because I think there's a couple of acronyms you used in there that I think a few people wouldn't necessarily know. So just explain what those two are. So when you said obviously unstructured, we get that. That's fine. When you start talking about the Cayman, explain what that is. That's a Cayman Island entity. Is that what you mean?
Cayman Island SPV, special purpose vehicle.
Right. Cool. And then KYC, I know what that means, but I know a lot of people weren't. So sorry to ask you to explain that, but I just want to make sure everyone gets the full story. What is KYC?
Do you want me to start again or just?
No. Just carry on and explain. That's fine.
Oh, okay. Yes, so a lot of these things would be in a Cayman SPV, which is a special purpose vehicle set up specifically to hold an entity, which in this case was Impossible Food shares.
Right, yeah, makes sense.
Been bought on the private markets. Now, the problem is when things aren't structured or formally put into a process, it's very hard to get, for example, a buyer to come in and be comfortable taking a position in that special purpose vehicle when he's basically taking the word of the owner that, yes, things are in there and I'll give you your share when the time is right.
Trust me.
Trust me, yes. Trust me as a Chinese businessman who doesn't even want to go through the regulations of, us identifying exactly who he is, what we call KYC or know your client, which is an onboarding process which all of the regulators are required to go through. So I've come from a background of having to try to deal with all of that, and with the risk to reputation that all of those deals came with. So last year, as an example, I did $400 million worth of private market transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, congratulations, Sam, that was fantastic. It was a horrible year because every time we interacted, the number one goal was, we don't want anyone's reputation to get hurt here. So with that in mind, I've been looking for a way to do private markets responsibly.
Okay.
And responsibly means only dealing with the biggest and the best asset managers.
Yeah.
So with the KKRs and the major players.
Yeah.
But on the other side, bringing the credibility of the back end of our system, which is the trustee services, the people who are going to do the fund accounting, who are going to hold the capital, etc.
Yep.
Ensuring that all of this is very transparent and very credible, and is also fully regulated by the Australian regulators.
Right. So you're essentially coming out of the Wild West, which is what that last deal you described to me very much sounds like. I mean, it really is just, what can we do here but don't tell anyone, to an environment that's fully transparent. Everybody knows at every stage who the person is that's responsible, that's regulated, it's controlled, and the risk comes way down, right? Is that am I reading it right?
Yes, the reputation risk and the counterparty risk comes right down. And Steve, I think I've been doing this for 25 years, but a lot of people don't understand the private markets well. It's actually quite simple. It is, in the case of private equity, it is specialised investment managers conduct due diligence on a lot of companies.
Yep.
They choose which companies to invest in. They invest in them. They support those companies until there is an exit, whether it's an IPO or a merger and acquisition, and then they sell them.
Yep.
The difficulties come in how you then administer all of the reporting, all of the interaction with the investment companies, and how we bring that together in a way that smaller investors are welcome to the party.
Yep. Okay. And so you left Hong Kong, come back here, and how did you end up at Antler? Was it something that you were aware of, or did you become aware of it in some way? And
look, I came back in January, hit the ground running, went out to all of the industry participants. I'm in talks with the Australian Investment Council, mm-hmm. with the leading private equity players, the venture capital players. And I had incredible buy-in from all of the industry participants I spoke with. People were saying, yes, you've got to do this. But I found that I didn't know how to start.
Right.
I've been doing this for so long, but I'm not a technology person, and I'm not a deep operations person. So finding the right people to actually know how to start a business was my biggest hurdle. And someone told me about Antler. And Antler, as you very well know, Steve, they are all about interviewing around 12 to 1,500 people.
Yep.
From all areas, all different specialties, choosing 80, putting them in a room together with some structure and saying, go for it.
Go for it. Good luck.
And it's crazy. It really is crazy. So I was there for a few days. I met Angus, one of my co-founders, and he had a very similar idea to mine about fractionalized ownership or democratization of real assets.
Yep.
And we found that we had a great fit. Now, Angus ticked the box for me because he'd had roles as a chief technology officer in the past. He knew how to build technology. He knew how to formulate a go-to-market strategy and to get things moving along. A couple of days later, I met Hugh. And Hugh, as I mentioned, is a lawyer. He's been in financial services for many years. He's worked in the Caymans. And he had a very, very good, deep operational understanding of the space. So I find myself incredibly lucky to find those people within a few days and then to be put into a situation. And this is a real value add, what Antler did. They put us in these situations where we have to under pressure, work as a team and come up with something.
Yep.
And people's personalities really come out when they're working under pressure. So you very quickly realise if you're compatible, and luckily we were.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And I think, whether you go into the Antler program or there's other ways that these things happen, and this is a conversation we have a lot. And I was actually talking about it in the previous interview, the sliding doors moment. These people come together often as co-founders or opportunities, or something happens. And when you really look back on it, the chances of that happening are really, really small. But it did happen, and the people there decided to make something out of it, and that's how businesses are born. And as much as you say you're very lucky, this is happening every day all around the world, and that's what makes the magic of business, I guess. And I'm very pleased that you've found that, and I think what you're doing is amazing. So whereabouts are you up to? So 5-6 weeks, sort of 8 weeks in, and so forth. What have you achieved so far? Where are you sort of in your very, very early journey? And what's been the hardest thing, even though it's been such a short space of time so far? And what do you foresee being the biggest hurdle moving forwards?
Look, it's thanks for saying that you're on board and you like the idea. Look, even though we've only met recently, I've been working on this since August last year, August 2020. I've been working with some of the leading private equity groups globally on this. I was actually invited to work with one of them on a platform earlier this year, but I didn't think it was the right strategic fit either for the private equity group or for us.
Yeah.
So the biggest hurdle to date has been validating the idea, because it's very easy to validate an idea in your own head. But you've got to get other people to validate it. And that's a great idea, Sam, isn't validation. You soon learn that the real validation is when you go to people and saying, okay, so are you on board? And when we get to this stage, are you going to support us?
Yep.
And it's not until you have those conversations that you know if the validation's real or not.
Absolutely.
So that's been a real process. Obviously, since we're going to be going to market for funding, the investors need to see that validation, and that's what Antler's helped us with.
Yep.
So, validation for us was through investors, through the product providers, so the large asset managers, and also through the networks that we're going to have to deal with. So, Steve, I think you'd know that, for us to be on an Antler program, we have to be scalable. Yes. They're not wanting to set up a little mum and dad shop that's going
global. Have to be global,
okay.
I believe, is the requirement, isn't it? They want something that's a potential global player.
A potential global, very scalable opportunity. So I think what really resonates with people who know the industry is, in Australia, we have a very, very large yet fragmented universe of private wealth advisors and financial consultants. Mm-hmm. And they're all a little bit hamstrung at the moment because we've had the Royal Commission. Yep. There have been some slaps on the wrist, and the banks are getting rid of their private wealth networks. So these advisors are all moving away from where they could sell bank product. And they're now there with clients, and predominantly they're putting people into listed equities. And that's making up the majority of portfolios. But listed equities are free to trade. You can get a Robinhood app and trade for free now. So you're in a very commoditized space. What we've been working on is talking to those private wealth networks and advisors and getting them on board that we want to start an education process with them where they're comfortable putting their clients into some private market opportunities.
Yep.
And the hurdle there is that they don't know this market very well. They know it's there and they want to do it, but they need reassurance it can be done responsibly. And that's probably been the biggest hurdle.
Yes, and they're beat up. I mean, they've been beaten left, right and centre by everybody. I feel for the industry, and there's a huge lack of trust in the industry, not because of them, but for other reasons that we won't sort of go into. And yeah, it's a tough gig. And I think, there's a number of different companies wanting to do a number of different things. Haven't heard of anyone doing what you're doing, but we've had other fintechs on that are trying to approach different problems around that industry. And I think it's going to go through a huge revolution in the next couple of years. I think it's going to be amazing. And I think it's going to be really good for the end investor, as well as obviously enabling these advisors to actually really offer some high quality products. And that's essentially what you're doing, isn't it? You're going to give them not just a product, but you're going to, well, by the sounds of it, and I think that's probably the biggest genius stroke of all, you're going to teach those advisors to really understand it. I know I have had advisors in the past, because I'm a similar age to you, so I've been around long enough, that they've tried to sell me a product that they didn't understand. And I asked them questions and they honestly don't. And I'm like, how can you try and put me into a product if you don't understand it? That's a terrifying thought. And then their credibility is gone from my perspective as an advisor. So I think that's a great angle. I really do.
Yeah, it's really about education, Steve. And we're not here to be an overnight success. We want to be on this journey. We want to be on the journey with the Australian Investment Council, who are in place to champion the cause of the private markets in Australia. We want it to be homegrown, because I've just spent 20 years out of Australia. I'd love to come home and give something back to Australia. So yes, it's an education process, but more importantly, it's an education process from the most credible players. What we are seeing is there's a lot of demand for these private market opportunities. And that's globally. And there's some product coming to market which is more single asset type of, buy into this microbrewery, for example. It's, they're raising $1 million. But we don't think that most people have the ability to conduct the proper due diligence on that, for example, or to do the proper valuation work to see if it's actually a good deal. So we're about diversifying your portfolio, not just jumping into the first thing that you can find, and only being aligned with guys who have proven. They've got 20, 30 years track record. They've got very, very strong, narrow mandates, so they can't go out and invest in anything. And getting those portfolio managers in front of people in Australia and having the conversation, what is private equity? What's the journey? What's the process? And really doing the hard work and the education, because longer term, that's going to make sure this industry is constructed properly.
Absolutely. Let's change the tune a little bit. Let's talk a tiny little bit about yourself. So, as you said, you've been in Hong Kong for 20 years. Seen some changes during that time. I'm a big fan of Hong Kong. I used to go to Hong Kong a lot before it was handed back, after it was handed back. I haven't been recently, but I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago was the last time I went. But you've come back to Australia, obviously, during a pandemic, something that no one had ever really experienced and really didn't know how to handle. 2 questions I've got around that. What's changed in your maybe belief and head system during this pandemic? Because you've had sort of a year in Hong Kong, and then you've had sort of, 6 to 8 months here now. And like I sort of mentioned to a lot of people, most of the candidates that we are interviewing for jobs have changed what they're looking for because of the pandemic. They look at the world differently. Their priorities have changed. And I think that's going to stay and not go back. So because you've had such two quite extreme environments that you've been in during this, I'm interested to hear how that's affected you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Steve. So I think 2017, Hong Kong started to change. There was a bit of pushback from especially the students about what was happening with the handover, etc. And it was a lot of turbulence. We had days where there was tear gas in the streets just outside the office. It wasn't a very fun time. But at the time, we all thought, well, it'll be over soon and we'll be back to normalcy. But we never got it, because as soon as that sort of started to die down, COVID rolled in. And you're right, it really does start changing your perspective of your work life, and I suppose your work-life balance. Because when you start working from home, you realise that maybe it doesn't have to be the normal 9 to 5 grind that you've been used to, especially in a corporate finance career of 20 odd years. So we didn't suffer too badly in lockdown from COVID. I think there were only a couple of weeks in 2020 that I had to work from home, but it certainly changed the dynamics of the office environment and how you communicated with your colleagues and with clients. And I think looking back in hindsight and reflecting on your question, it's probably what drove me to want to be an entrepreneur and to move away from the corporate life and do what I'm really passionate about and do it in a way that I think is responsible and ethical, and not have to be bound by a corporation's desire to do something else, which maybe I'm not really aligned with. Coming back to Australia, I arrived on the 1st of January, straight into quarantine for 2 weeks, and then hit the ground running when I came out. Now, COVID in New South Wales at that time wasn't too bad, and I thought this was fantastic. People weren't wearing masks in the street. I was unemployed, but working very hard. Working very hard to drive this concept that I had to market. And it really empowered me to realise that, hey, there's an opportunity, there's the possibility, even at my age, to almost start again and build something that you're really passionate about and you really believe in. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's been my journey over the last 2 or 3 years.
No, absolutely it does. And I think there has been a huge amount of entrepreneurs born out of this pandemic through two main areas. One, some people in certainly in the earlier days, and it's not impacting us as quite as much as it did back then, lost their jobs. There was a lot of redundancies early on. Now, obviously, the travel and the hospitality industry, they're still getting absolutely battered. But most of the other industries have learned how to deal with it. But in the early days, a lot of people lost their jobs, and there wasn't, there was talk of mass unemployment and recession, and it was all very doom and gloom. And I think a lot of people just thought, you know what? I'm going to go and do it now. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs were born out of necessity. They needed to suddenly make money and there wasn't a job there for them. So they went out and did that. And I think that's great. And then I think this year, like yourself, there's been a lot of entrepreneurs that are born out of the fact that the world's changed. Change creates opportunity. Their views on the world have changed. They want to do something that the number one thing we get asked for is they want a job where they feel they can have an impact. Now, if they can't find a job where they feel have an impact, they want to go and do something that has an impact, i.e. start a business. So there's a tech boom going on, obviously. The world is changing the way they live. And I think a lot of people have recognized and thought, if ever I'm going to do it, now's the time. So, there's obviously a lot of negatives out of the pandemic, but I think the positives are it's changed a lot of people's lives for the better. They've got out of perhaps habits and ruts that they were stuck in that weren't horrific, but they weren't really where they wanted to be. And it sounds like that's happened to you as well, which is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. It's necessity because either you just can't find the right job, or it's almost desperation of, I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah,
it's been the daily grind, and surely there's more to life.
Yes,
which is probably what's been one of the biggest drivers to me, and it really is, as you've rightly said, technology has changed the world. Technology has enabled efficiencies to come in place that were just not possible. So, and I'll give you a great example about the industry and the product that we're putting together now.
Please do.
People say, why were there hurdles? Why won't these large private equity groups or venture capital funds allowing smaller investors? And the problem was, when you're a private equity group and you've got an insurance company willing to give you $100 million check, you didn't have to spend a lot of money on building efficiencies into your system, or to building technology to make it easier, because they didn't mind doing a couple of days paperwork for a $100 million check. Now, they haven't built themselves to accept $20 million from 400 investors, because there's a tremendous amount of administration. You've got to go to the know your client, the onboarding processes, ensuring everything's done appropriately through the regulators, the reporting, the taxation issues, the communication to all of these people. So it's an industry that is really ripe to be changed by technology, because with the technology platform like WeReach, we can bring those efficiencies in place and we can aggregate this investor demand and give it very efficiently and effectively to the private equity group in a way that they're now very, very happy to have these clients on board. And 2 or 3 years ago, we probably didn't have the technology or the acceptance from these big product providers that could be possible.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they just didn't need to, and I think the world is changing. It's exciting. It really is. So talk to me. I'm guessing you're going to be heading into a capital raise at some time in the relatively near future. Am I right?
Yes. So Antler will hopefully give us some funding in a couple of weeks when we go through the investment committee.
Yep.
Look, we expect that we'll be back in the market again next year for some further capital. We are a technology company and there's costs associated with that. We've been very lucky, though, that we already have an MVP or a minimum viable product to bring to market, and we're confident that will be in market this year. Awesome. However, there will be more and further ongoing work to build that technology and maintain the technology and stay one step ahead of where this market's going. So, yes, we'd anticipate probably first to second quarter 2022, we'll be back for more capital.
Okay. And you're probably going to be growing in size, I would imagine, to be able to enable all of this in some capacity. I think, a lot of this show and why we started doing this show wasn't just another podcast or just another show. The point was to help founders and budding businesses connect with other people. It's a platform where you can connect and really articulate your story quite clearly. And whether that's because you want to hire people or whether that's because you want to gain customers or whether you're capital raising, it's supposed to fit all three of those. So I guess at some stage when you do begin to hire, this will be a great piece of content that you can use. Tell me why in your minds would someone want to come and work with you guys?
Well, I think you're exactly right. This is a terrific platform that you're offering, Steve. Give it a nudge is giving exposure to the companies like us, but also to people who are interested in getting into a startup.
Absolutely.
And maybe don't know how to approach the founders or the managers of those companies. So, congratulations to you for putting this together. Look, we are definitely going to need staff. We need to grow, and I've been around long enough to know that a company's only as good as its people. Mm-hmm. It's a very new process to me of doing this and building teams without all of the corporate structure that I had.
Yep.
But all I can say is that, we're very, very passionate about the opportunity we're seeing in the market. We're not reinventing the wheel, and this democratization of private market assets has already started. So this is a validated business that we're going into, and we think it's very, very promising, and there's going to be a lot of growth, and we want to make sure it's a fun journey. So, anyone who is interested in joining a team of very passionate people who believe in our story and feel that they have something to add to us as a team, we'd be very, very happy to talk to as we roll out and grow over the next 6 months.
Fantastic. Sam, thank you so much for coming on. It's not always easy to articulate a clear story so early on, but I think you've done an amazing job. And obviously it's been knocking around in your head, and you've been working on it before you met your other founders as well. So there was a lot there. I think it's great. I think a lot of these platforms that are trying to bring what was unreachable to a lot of people, whether it be finance or whether it be property or all sorts of different things, are amazing. And that's what technology is enabling. It's hopefully going to be sharing more wealth and opportunity across the whole world rather than having such a select few, which can only be a good thing for us. Thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed it. It was interesting, and I look forward to watching you grow. I will try and tune in for your Antler when you do the what do you call it, the presentation to them in a couple of weeks. I can get into those, so I'm going to come and watch that as well, as long as I'm not filming here or doing something. And I'm sure we'll keep in contact.
That's excellent, Steve. Look, thanks again for having us on board. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks at the IC, and look forward to potentially coming back on in the next 3 or 4 months 3 or so months and giving you an update of where we are.
Absolutely. Face to face next time, I hope.
Hopefully.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Steve.